Hi everybody, how you doing? Happy Tuesday and welcome to another episode of This Mess. I hope everybody's doing okay. I'm doing pretty good. Yeah. So I know last week I told you that this week we would talk about horror holiday movies. And that's definitely still in the pipeline. But this weekend I got kind of sidetracked and I decided it was time to talk about something. Now, I'm trying to think where I would have talked about it. I'm pretty sure I would have talked about it on here on this channel, where I talk a lot about the movie Francis Ford Coppola's version of Bram Stoker's Dracula. It's a very famous movie for very obvious reasons, but I have said in the past that this movie is only worth watching for its comedic value. And I maintain that. I'm not straying from this at all. But I do think I have to give it credit in other ways. So today's show is going to be me just talking about this movie, discussing where it has its merits, but I also want to repoint out the parts of it that are, in a word, garbage. And while also making sure that you understand, I do love this movie for whatever bizarre masochistic reasons I have. I can't really put them into words, but I do love this movie. So this past weekend, I'd spent a very, very long day editing. What I'm doing is basically rewriting a book that I wrote about 6 years ago. And it's been a very grueling process. The end of the day had come. I'd been dealing with my kids all day. I'd been dealing with my husband all day and doing this rewrite. So I had had a long day. I plopped down on my couch and I pulled up Netflix, was scrolling through it. God, Netflix has so much crap on it right now. Going through Netflix and I see Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I'm like, yes, hell yes, I can totally unwind with this movie. So I watched it, and through my laughter, through a lot of this movie, I had to admit, there are some good things about this movie. I really need to give this movie some credit on some things. First and foremost, we have to point out that Francis Ford Coppola has a thing for crediting the authors of the books from which he is pulling the material to make these movies. I mean, he does it with The Godfather. He does it with this. And as a writer, I have to say, thank you. Nobody else does that. So, this movie, I remember when it came out. It came out in 1992. I was only 9 years old at the time. I was a little too young to go to the theaters and see it. This is a movie definitely, if I'd wanted to rent it at their video store, it would have been allowed. But it was a little bit before I got around to watching it. It was after my parents' divorce, so I was maybe 12 years old the first time I saw this movie. And I remember the one scene that stood out the most to me was what IMDb is calling it the ravishment scene, which is ridiculous. It's the weird, what is it? Is it bestiality? Is it, what would that be called? Interspecies erotica. The scene where Dracula, as the wolf monster, is having sex with Lucy in that garden. And I remember being a kid and watching that and being like, oh, okay. I've always thought that scene, as opposed to being sexy, was just weird. Where it's like, okay. I'm still there like, oh, this is weird. So, as I said before, this movie is comedy gold, and it is completely by accident. I watch a lot of movies that are accidentally hilarious. We've made sort of a niche genre out of it, talking about it on the Ghostwriters podcast, where we watch movies that are accidentally hilarious horror films. And sometimes you don't know whether to be thrilled or offended by these films. This one, because it takes itself so seriously, and because I saw one review. I did a little reading up on this so that I could, sound halfway intelligent when talking about this. But I saw one review refer to this movie as pompous. And I have to say that's not inaccurate. It may not be fair, but it is not exactly inaccurate. It is a movie that takes itself very seriously. And because of some of its shortfallings, it ends up kind of being hilarious as a result. So I'll get to it. First of all, I want to talk about the good things about this movie. First and foremost, this movie is beautiful. This is a visually stunning movie. There are camera tricks and shots and just basic choices that were made in the making of this movie that are stunning. I happen to think that that shadow puppet scene in the cinematograph when Dracula and Mina are first together and they're watching that kind of dirty movie, but in the background there are those shadow puppets of the battles that Prince Vlad had against the Ottoman Turks. I think that whole thing is incredible visually. I think the costumes, I think the settings, I do think this is a beautiful, beautiful movie. Now, the costume designer actually won an Oscar for this movie. Her name is Eiko Ishioka, and she's Japanese. And a lot of Japanese influence went into the making of the costumes in this movie. And I think you can see it. There's a lot of kind of theatrical kabuki that went into this. And what's really crazy is that influence, for some odd reason, worked really well with that sort of Orthodox Eastern kind of aesthetic that was going on in Transylvania. It's a melding that may not be historically accurate, but it works still. It gives you a picture, it gives you a sense of the area. I think it's beautiful. But I also think the British costumes are beautiful. Lucy's wedding dress, which then becomes her basic death shroud, is stunning. You have to admit, it's stunning. The costuming in this movie is mwah, chef's kiss. Then also, like, I didn't realize this until I read about it when I was doing research for this, but this is one of the only Dracula movies to include the character of Quincy P. Morris. And if you've ever read the book, it takes two men to kill Dracula in the book. Jonathan Harker, and Quincy P. Morris. They kill him together. And the fact that in so many previous movies, they sort of make an amalgamation of Arthur Holmwood and Dr. Seward. Like, Dr. Seward, of all of them, is the one that tends to be his own character. I guess it's more fun to have the guy that runs the sanitarium. But Quincy P. Morris is often kind of mishmashed into another different character as just one of the guys that was there also wooing Lucy and also on the hunt for Dracula. They just always kind of turn into nothing burgers in the movies. This is a movie that included him and included the heart stabbing scene. Like, you have to have credit for that. We actually have Quincy in this. Something else, the musical score in this movie is incredible. The music is fantastic, and it's something that you remember. You can hear that opening refrain of the cellos, and you know this movie, and I think that's very effective. I think it's fantastic. Now let's get to the poopy parts, shall we? Historically, it is now kind of part of the story of this movie that it was a mistake. Hiring Keanu Reeves to play the part of Jonathan Harker. Keanu has said, I was so exhausted, I had nothing left to give for this movie. Francis Ford Coppola has said maybe it wasn't the best idea. He wanted someone else. I read somewhere where they wanted, oh shit, I didn't write it down and I'm going to forget his name now. Oh my God. I forget. Here we go. If I don't write it down, my brain is just... They wanted a different kind of actor. They were going for something else. The studio wanted someone who was hot at the minute. And it turned out to be a huge mistake because here's the thing. I like Keanu Reeves. I am a fan of most of his work. But I do have to say, he is always a little bit of a different version of Ted Theodore Logan in all of his forms. Even as John Wick, movies that I really like. They have great rewatch value too. There's just still a bit of Ted to him. So when he came into this movie and tried for probably one of the worst British accents I've ever heard, it's laughable. There are actually parts where you can't help but laugh at his line deliveries. And I don't like that because, again, I like Keanu, but he's garbage in this movie. Someone else who's actually really bad in this movie and deserves more blame for that is Winona Ryder. And again, I don't like saying it. I love Winona. Heathers is one of my favorite movies, and that movie works because of how much she carries it. I think she's fantastic. She's horrible in this movie. Her accent work is garbage. Her delivery, garbage. Like, she didn't know whether to play it straight or be melodramatic. Like, ugh, bad. They both are terrible in this movie. Now, Anthony Hopkins, he had just won, when this movie came out, he had just won the Oscar for playing Hannibal Lecter, Silence of the Lambs. Anthony Hopkins is one of those guys. I love him when he's on screen. But I gotta tell you, he's walking the line in this one. He seems to maybe was kind of absorbing the atmosphere of the set that was put out by Keanu and Winona. He tends to get a little hammy sometimes, which is not totally unlike him, but it is unflattering in this part. Also, just to give him a little bit of credit, thanks to Hollywood and thanks to bad accent work by various actors, I think sometimes people forget, if you've never read the book, Abraham Van Helsing is not German, he's not Austrian, he's Dutch. And I think there were a few times when Anthony Hopkins would say something and it's like he tried to deliver that, because I think Anthony Hopkins is someone who respects source material. He's someone who respects the book. And he, like, the way he would say yeah, it didn't sound to me like German. It sounded like he was trying to come off a little more like he's from Holland, like Van Helsing was. So I have to appreciate that, but also, like, I'm side-eyeing Anthony Hopkins a little bit in this part. Even though he is still great, and I have to admit, he's still great, but he could have done better. Now, the crux of my argument about this movie is the casting of Gary Oldman. It's not that I'm not a fan of Gary Oldman. I'm just not a huge fan of Gary Oldman as a leading man. And I'll explain why. Gary Oldman's best roles are the small parts where he can be big. The small parts where he can be that outlandish character, whether he overplays it, kind of like he does in True Romance, or he underplays it, kind of like he does in The Fifth Element, where those are memorable parts, but very little screen time, and he's great in them. Now, this over-the-top way that he plays the character, I have to admit it works when he's doing old Dracula, when he's playing the old part. Okay, I can see it. I actually think it works. I think some of those strange mannerisms kind of work in making this character, who is at this point beyond time, what we would see as eccentricities, it works. Where it doesn't work is where we're supposed to buy him as a heartthrob, as the heartthrob prince wooing Mina. No. The facial expressions and I think his accent work is just a little too heavy-handed for me. And, like, I'm just mad at everybody's accent work in this movie. I'm going to say it. But I think he does well as the old Dracula and in his monster forms. That's fine. I have no complaints. The heartthrob prince part is where I have complaints, where it's like, God, pull back. You're being a little too much like Nicolas Cage. Pull back. I don't like him in this part. Yeah. So, also, and we have to admit, they are a little closer to the source material, to the book, in this movie than a lot of previous screen adaptations have been. But even still, there are some asinine scenes in this movie. The writing is ridiculous. And I have one scene in particular I have to talk about because it's so stupid. And it's one where I laugh because it's so stupid. So it's the scene where all of the men are in Carfax Abbey and they're cleansing the grave dirt that Dracula usually sleeps in. And Mina is in Dr. Seward's kind of apartment and she's there being safe, and Dracula comes to her. And this is where they kind of have their consummation. That's movie thing, that's not in the book. And he puts her hand on his chest and he says, "There is no life in this body." Which, that's fine, great delivery. Except Winona Ryder as Mina goes, "Oh, but you live. You live." Come on. That's fucking stupid. The line is stupid. The acting is stupid. The whole thing is stupid. Why couldn't they just write her going, I beg your pardon? What do you mean? What is it? But you live. If you're going to be confused, say, what are you talking about? You live. Come on. It's stupid. So I've been going on for 15 minutes about this movie. Again, a movie I actually do like. A movie that I'm happy to sit and watch. But it's ridiculous. This movie is ridiculous. For all of the things about it that are amazing, there's just one or two things more about it that are stupid, ridiculous, and badly done. Okay? So, I feel I should give the disclaimer. This is my opinion. If your opinion differs from me, if you think this is the greatest vampire movie ever made, that's fine. You're not going to tweak my nose even the slightest bit. If you say that, that's okay. I really understand why people would watch this movie and be like, that was incredible. I get it. But this is my opinion. And I think this movie is fucking ridiculous while also still loving it. So, what do you think of this movie? How old were you when this came out, if you were even born at all? There are people out there who are full-grown adults who wouldn't have been born when this came out. Oh my God. But I just remember this movie being kind of a big deal when it first came out. I remember seeing the commercials with the previews, and I remember just what a big deal it looked like. How, even the previews, even the commercials for it were visually stunning. It just kind of falls flat because of a few mistakes, and just one less of these mistakes. Like, just a better Jonathan Harker could have fixed a lot. A better Nina would have fixed a lot, and it's just, but I love it the way it is. I wouldn't change a thing. I would change some things, but I love it as it is. I watch it, I laugh my butt off. It completely erased the tensions from the day. I went to bed happy. So do you like this movie? Do you think the casting? What do you think of the casting choices? Let me know below. Next week's Super Promise. Unless something apocalyptic happens, we're going to talk holiday movies next week. And that'll be it for me. I hope everything's going okay. I hope the world is treating you well, especially this time of year. It's a crappy time of year to be having a crappy time at life, So I hope everything is going well. That's it for me. The remote worked to start the video. Let's see if it screws me over again and stopping it. If this channel ever starts doing well, I will upgrade. But I mean, I honestly, I think I paid $10 for this. It's not worth $10. Thing works half the time. So bye-bye for now. Of course.